On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Utkarsh Sangi. He is the head of engineering at EarnUp. We're going to be talking about that senior engineering role and what does it take to move past being a senior engineer? What are some of those skills? What are some circumstances if it's okay to stay at a senior engineer? Maybe it's really a good fit and you don't really want to move on because you enjoy the technology. We're going to be talking about that. We're going to talk about the role of manager. We're going to be talking about mentorship, a lot of stuff. We're going to try to jam in here. Utkarsh, thanks for taking some time.
Thank you for having me here. It's nice to be here.
Absolutely. All right, EarnUp. Tell everyone what you guys do over there.
Great. So EarnUp is a mortgage servicing company. We provide a solution that allows financial servicers, financial institutions to service their mortgages in a way that they don't have to handle collections, calling people, moving the money. We handle all of that on our platform. They can focus on making mortgages and receiving the money that they're owed.
Okay, so let's talk about this topic. You mentioned it, and I thought it was really great because a lot of people are always trying to obviously move up the career ladder, the engineering ladder, and that senior engineering role is an interesting one because sometimes people end up staying for a variety of reasons. And I don't think it's necessarily a good or bad thing. It's a personal decision. Let's talk about that. So as an engineering leader, you see all levels of engineering. When it comes to this senior title, are there particular reasons why someone either gets stuck there or actually, let's start there. Are there particular reasons of why someone might get stuck at that senior level? And define what senior is for everyone so we have some common syntax here.
Yeah, let's start with the definition of senior engineer. A senior engineer is an engineer who can handle project level complexity. And that means that they are given a vague objective. Please build me XYZ solution. Build me a website for myself. Build me a website for this voice actor. This kind of vague problem statement can be translated into key deliverables that can then be farmed out to other engineers who are more junior or done by the senior engineer themselves. That skill is, I think, what separates the senior from the mid-level or junior engineer. And so that's the archetypal senior engineer. And going back to why people get stuck here or like why it's acceptable to be stuck here. In my first job in tech, I was told that senior engineer is a terminal position, which means that it's the first position where if you don't want a promotion from that position, that's fine. The company won't expect you to not be performing just because you haven't been promoted in the last 2 years. Every junior engineer is expected to become senior eventually, but not every senior engineer is expected to go past that. So I thought that was kind of weird, but now I get it. I get why that is a terminal position, because some people want to focus on things outside of work. They want to focus on their families. They want to focus on their lives. They don't want to work at 3 a.m. in the morning when there's an emergency, and they could be very skilled. But they might not be interested in giving it all to the company, and so senior engineer might be a good position for them. And another thing is, I think positions after senior engineer fundamentally involve a role change, where going from junior to senior involves getting better at the skills you execute in your day-to-day job. So it's a fairly natural progression up until that point. After senior, you have to use skills that you might not have developed until that point. You might have to unlearn some of your skills because solving a problem in a senior fashion might be incorrect or might be not as effective as solving it in a staff eng fashion or a principal eng fashion. And so learning those skills as well as unlearning your senior engineering skills is hard. It's hard to unlearn things. It's hard to operate in a different way. And that often causes senior engineers to stumble. And that often leads to a roadblock for a lot of senior engineers.
Absolutely. I mean, I love the overview, and I love the reasons. And I guess a question when it comes to the senior engineering role, if someone decides that's a good level for them, they're really happy with what they're doing, they enjoy the technical aspects of it, it fits their lifestyle. Is it a societal, bigger scope, when we're just leaving the engineering, but just societally, like when we think about people, we're taught you have to go up the career ladder. We're said, hey, you need to progress. Everyone's seemingly trying to move forward. And then you find someone that's happy And it's always not viewed that way, right? Sometimes it's viewed as, well, don't you want more? Well, don't you want to progress? Is that an unfortunate byproduct of obviously, being in a society where we're always trying to, make that progress and kind of achieve more? Is that, or obviously, I know you're not speaking for the entirety of society. We're just talking about within the scope of engineering, but I see that sometimes.
I see that too. And I have employees who tell me I want to be a staff engineer because I want to keep growing my career. But like, maybe that growth will make you less happy than you are right now. And that's something to consider. Like, do you want to meet society's expectations but be unhappy in the process? I personally think like individual happiness and the happiness of my family is perhaps more important. And so that's what I'm optimizing for. But I think it depends on the individual. Like some people, their career title is maybe more important to them. And so for those people, like maybe going for promotion, trying to become higher in engineering is the right call. I do want to make an analogy to like a different profession. In academia, administrators are compensated way more highly than professors. However, we don't think of administrators as being higher on the track than professors. So there are ways where you could be low, like not growing on the track, but still in a position that is of high respect, that you like, that gives you job satisfaction. Yeah. And that might be senior engineer for you.
When we're talking about an engineer, obviously, they're in a team. They're made up of a manager, certain people who carry out work. Every structure is different, so we're speaking very generally. When we're looking at the structure, we're looking at a senior engineer. We're talking about growing past the senior engineer. The role of the manager has to be included here because it might not always be the senior engineer that might or might not want to progress. There's a manager that also does performance evaluations, is doing the mentorship. Talk to us about the role of the manager. And I'm not saying the senior engineer stalls out because of the manager, but just the curious, when we're talking about someone who's hit that senior engineering role and whether they move forward or not, where does the role of the manager play?
I know for me personally, I've seen the most growth when I've had a good relationship with my manager, regardless of my skills or my manager's skills. So maintaining a good relationship with your manager, I think is important. Ignoring the skills aspect of it, it allows you to be more effective because you have open lines of communication, and that just leads to natural synergy in the workplace. Ignoring the promotions, ignoring the titles, like just having a good relationship with your manager is useful. In the case for promotion, especially past senior, we talked earlier about how it's a role change. And when you're doing role change, you need to have a lot of trust in the, like, you need to have trust with your manager because your manager is going to tell you, hey, employee, you have the skill that is really good, and I need you to not use this skill. And I need you to use a different skill because that's the skill we're developing. And I need you to solve this problem using this different skill. And you have to trust that person. And so that basis of trust is very important because if you don't trust your manager, you're not going to be able to use that feedback. You're not going to be able to use that advice. And if you don't act on the advice, they're not going to see you improve. And so it's kind of like a chicken and egg thing. Like you need to first establish the relationship so that then you can trust them and act on their feedback, and then they can see that you're acting on their feedback, which results in them seeing growth in you. So it's sort of a symbiotic thing, in my opinion.
When you're looking at a senior engineer and they want to move to, let's say, a staff, or they want to move to, let's say, even a people manager role, right? So those are two different options. They have two different tracks they have that they can possibly take. How do you advise people who are that senior engineering role to kind of, what's a mentorship like in terms of trying to figure out which of those paths might be better and kind of helping them close that gap?
So I start with, what does this person want to do in a day-to-day, and what do they want to achieve as a result of their goal, or of their role, sorry. Because once we have these two things, we can figure out what role would be a good match for them. Because often people who don't have a given role, they ascribe certain elements to that role that might not be true. I know before I became a manager, I thought managers had all this power and they could exercise this power. And I wanted to be a manager because I could exercise that power. And now I realize power is not given to anyone. Like, managers are not bestowed with power. In fact, in many ways, they're not as powerful as ICs. But you don't know that before the fact. So I instead say, what work do you want to do, and what outcomes do you want to drive in this role? And through that conversation, maybe we can figure out which role is ideal for this person. Maybe they want to continue as a senior engineer. Maybe they want to drive larger technical change. That would be an ideal role for a staff engineer, because that's what the staff engineer does. They drive technical change across organizations. They solve problems across organizations and teams. And then maybe they're more interested in people development. Maybe they really enjoy mentorship. Well, then maybe people management is a better avenue for them, because they get to exercise those skills more.
It's an interesting question I'm going to ask, and I'm not sure your response, because we didn't talk about this, but I want to get your thoughts on this. And I think it fits within the context of when we're talking about an engineer, let's say at a senior level, someone is looking at this person's work, they're determining the skills required to move up. It's a manager through performance reviews. There's a component of this is, yes, some science. I can read your code and I can determine whatever quality, that bar that we're talking about. There's also art, because as every engineer would tell you, there's not one way to do this. There's multiple ways. And also then, is there a limitation on how good the manager is an engineer? What if that manager can't foresee why this person's skills are being applied a certain way, because they can't potentially work with that person's skill set, right? And again, not trying to assign blame to the manager or the engineer, but I'm curious because there seems to be a fair amount of subjectivity within this discipline of software engineering that creeps in. And if we're talking about someone that's stuck at the senior engineering level by choice or not by choice, how does that subjectivity get worked within engineering leadership? I guess that's maybe my question to you.
I think it's very hard for someone to measure a skill that they don't have. So if this senior engineer has a manager who is never a staff engineer, it's going to be very hard for that person to accurately measure, accurately advocate for, just like accurately help the senior engineer become a staff engineer. So I personally think like all managers should be at least a staff engineer, because if you're expecting staff engineers to report to them, like they have to at least have experienced that or grown to that level. That being said, I agree there is subjectivity to skill assessment, but that's why I'm not sure skill assessment is necessarily the right way to do promos. And I think promotion is more about impact and what objectives you have achieved, as opposed to how you have achieved those objectives. And the objectives you've achieved, maybe we can set them as goals even before. So we have objective measures, like you're going to improve my monthly active users from X to Y, and it doesn't matter how you do it. It just matters that it goes to Y.
Okay, I quite like that. I think that's a good view of it. I think as you're talking about the engineer that's hit a senior level, there's obviously, as you mentioned, there is a role change, which is very interesting to talk about that in of itself. And we're also looking at the standpoint, if they do want to get to that staff level, there might be a technical gap. Let's talk about the technical gap first. If there is a technical gap, we're talking about a senior engineer, 6+ years experience. This person's been doing the job. Where does that technical gap get closed? How does a senior engineer level up? I hate that term, but how do they level up their skills to push to staff?
Yeah, I'm going to say something kind of controversial. So feel free to push back on this. I'm not sure there's a big jump from the technical skills of a senior engineer to staff engineer. There maybe is a jump, but the way I would phrase it is, as a senior engineer, you're expected to be up to date. So a senior engineer who's up to date on 20 years ago's technology is expected to brush up and learn today's technology to be employable in today's space. In that process, they're going to acquire new technology skills. That means that the process of acquiring new technology skills is part of the skill set of the level 5, the senior engineer. It's not part of this level of the staff engineer. So they already have to be able to teach themselves. And if they can teach themselves one thing, they can teach themselves anything. And so the skill of skill acquisition is a senior engineer skill, and you have to already have mastered it by the time you're a senior engineer. So there's no additional skill there for becoming a staff engineer.
I mean, that's fair. And I think obviously within the construct of, what we're talking about, I think that makes sense, right? And I think maybe the subsequent question then is if somebody is at a senior level and it's not technical, we are starting to look at bigger picture impact You mentioned impact of their architectural decisions, their coding decisions, impact of some of those factors. When you're starting to look at that impact, and to get to that staff, get to that principal role, you must now oversee and understand upstream and downstream work components, right? How do you bridge that gap? Because I think that's not necessarily, okay, that's fair. I think you're right. That's not necessarily a hard skill of the coding itself, okay? But there are other technical skills and understanding of how pieces fit that are no longer just, I know the syntax to deliver X, Y, and Z.
Absolutely. And that's that thing that you pointed out. That's why I call that a role change rather than a skills gap, because it's fundamentally different. Like, let's say you had to solve or debug like a complicated code bug, right? As a senior engineer, you would solve it yourself. As a staff engineer, you would find the expert and you would say, "Hey, expert, can I pair with you for 1 hour and we can solve this together?" Right? So that's why I say it's like changing something. You have a way you could solve this problem. You need to step back and say, is my solution the right way? Can I solve it in a different way? And will this other solution be more effective? And so I should pursue it. Even if myself, I'm not as skilled in this other way. Maybe I'm not as skilled at asking for help, and I'm scared that asking for help, I'll get rejected. Well, I should still try, because that is the staff engineer skill set, or that is the more advanced engineer skill set. I should try it. And then if I'm not successful, I've learned something. Next time I'll be more successful at using that skill set.
Yeah, it's interesting as we're talking about some of these skills. I'm taking notes and I'm thinking about, if I'm a senior engineer and I'm looking to level up. And again, if you're a senior engineer, you will enjoy your level. Don't worry about it. You know, who cares? You know, if it fits your life, fits your family, you're happy. That's great. If you're a senior engineer, you are trying to move up and you're trying to move fast. You mentioned delegation. You mentioned the ability to look at a bigger picture, look at who has the right skill to solve the problem, whether it's you or you might be lacking it. It's starting to sound very managerial, like in terms of that problem solving. So the role that you said, the role change of, I know how to code and I know how to code elegant solutions because my mind understands that, is one thing. Now to move past senior engineer, whether it's a technical leadership track or people leadership track, there's a component that is pure human to human of understanding where you fit, how to accomplish. These are all things that, you know, when we talk to leaders on the podcast, or just everyone talks to leaders, these are the things they solve, right? I guess when you're a tech, and we can use you as an example. So when you got into engineering leadership and you had to give up the comfort of knowing how the cake was baked and you had to start trusting others for baking the cake, what is that gap like when we're trying to help a senior engineer move past that?
Before I answer the question, if I could just a slight tangent based on what you said, like you called the staff engineer plus technical leadership, right? And I really like that, because the skill that we're trying to get these senior engineers to learn is leadership. And be they growing on the technical leadership track or the people leadership track, they still need to acquire the leadership skill first. And that is what this role change is focused on, is don't solve your problems with engineering, solve them with leadership so you can develop leadership. And then you already have engineering. Now you have engineering and leadership. Technical leadership is in your grasp. Maybe you can learn people management, and now your people leadership is in your grasp. But that's where I see that like split and divergence. Going back to your question of like, are we just asking, like, we are asking these people to learn leadership because that's the path. If you want to continue being a great engineer, that's okay. But it's very unlikely that you will be more than a senior engineer, because fundamentally solving hard problems requires more than one human. And working with many humans requires bringing them together. And that is leadership, bringing many humans together to solve a problem. And so like, you're always going to have to work with people. Because you can't solve the hardest problems in a vacuum. Unless you're an academic, maybe you could, but like in industry, that's very hard.
Yeah, you know, the more we're talking, and I think you actually highlighted it. So we're talking about technical leadership, people leadership. It's that leadership component we need to layer on top of people that are excelling and doing well at their job, right? They're capable. You wouldn't, even if you decided that senior engineer is the level I want to stay at, you still have to be pretty good to achieve that level and maintain it, right? You know, maybe you just don't want to pick up those leadership skills, which I think we even talked about in society is okay. Maybe we need to become, hey, you know what? This person doesn't want that, and it's not a bad thing. When we're talking about this leadership thing, and it's kind of partly why the podcast has been talking about leadership a lot, and I think I mentioned it to you, was noticing the gap of there isn't a whole lot that people get in terms of leadership training unless it's a mentoring on the job. And it seems like such a difficult thing to solve because based on your manager, based on who you're at, you might learn to become a leader different. Is this where mentorship starts stepping in? I know we talk a lot, mentorship's discussed a lot. Find a mentor, which isn't easy for everyone. But when we're talking about how do you help gain some of these leadership skills, is that one path? Is there other paths that you see?
Yeah, I think it depends on the individual, because the individual needs to figure out what their needs are here. It's very hard for someone to tell you, hey, Utkarsh, to develop leadership, you need to do X, Y, and Z, because they don't know your style. You have your own style, and in your style there'll be gaps, and you need to look for ways to plug those gaps. So for me personally, in my journey, the way I most learned leadership in my early career was through my manager. I had a good relationship with a manager. Manager gives me direct feedback. I grow based on my manager's feedback, right? Like that is the ideal and the norm I would expect in our industry, and that's what happened to me. I think at some point it starts to become the employee's responsibility, and that's when you have to seek it out yourself. And this could be in your network, this could be in your company, or this could be external. I know I personally pay for personal development, and I know a lot of my peers do that as well, where they personally pay for professional development through coaches, through mentorship, through various other means. I think sometimes engineers are sort of loath to do this because they don't see the value in it. And I certainly did not see the value in this when I was a senior engineer. It took getting past it to see the impact, and then to be like, oh, I now will invest in it in the future, because I won't see the impact immediately, but I have seen the impact in the past. So I know that it is actually impactful.
Interesting. I love the conversation. I know, when we were talking about this, and we talked about getting to the senior engineering role. When I was thinking about this episode, I was a little bit concerned, is it going to have a negative connotation? And the more we've been speaking about it, I've actually come to the conclusion for myself, and obviously every listener can take it for themselves, is that it's not what everyone else thinks or cares about. It's really where you're at, what you want. And if you do want to progress, there are doors. And if you don't want to, that's okay. I think the manager, going back to that role, the manager, I do think it's tricky. And maybe this will be my final question to you, because is a manager, and we'll talk about you, right? When you see somebody who wants to stay at a senior engineering level, how do you start planning around that? Because you might need a staff level. Typically, you'd love to see that senior engineer move into a staff level. All of a sudden now, you might have to go external to the company, bring somebody in. They don't have all the same tribal knowledge as moving through that senior level. It does make it a little complicated for you. Talk to us a little bit about, from an engineering leader perspective, managing to somebody else who's okay staying there and having to manage around that person a bit. A little complicated question, but I'm curious.
I'm going to reveal one of my heuristics, which perhaps might be not great because other people might have different definitions of this heuristic. But in my experience, 1 in 10 senior engineers become staff engineer. Maybe it is as high as 1 in 6. Maybe it's as bad as 1 in 15. But the ratio is somewhere there, right? Like 1 in 6 to 1 in 15. So by default, I don't expect my senior engineers to become staff engineers. Like, they have to prove to me that they're going to become staff engineers. But by default, that expectation is not true just based on the numbers. Like, if it's a 1 in 6 chance, there's 5 out of 6 probability you're not going to make staff engineer, right? So if I have a staff engineer need in the company, unless there are people who are already on track to develop towards it, it's going to be an external hire, because people aren't just going to magically develop that skill in 3 months, in 6 months. They have to have a concerted effort. They have to be doing it, and they have to want it for a certain period of time. And like, roles usually take 6 months to open, 3 months to open. So you already know when you're opening a role, I know someone is like going to be a good fit for it. And if not, it's going to be an external hire.
Absolutely. Utkarsh, I appreciate you coming on, man. This is a great topic. I don't think we'll exhaust it. I could probably keep talking about this. We'll find a new place to go. I know you got to get back and get back to actually doing the people management and leadership for your company there at EarnUp. But tell me, if somebody wants to reach out to you, it sounds like you're very open, very communicative in terms of the subject. Is there a way that people can touch base with you to learn a little bit more and maybe, get some mentorship or just ask you any questions they might have?
Definitely. I'm not on a lot of social media, but I am on LinkedIn. So you can find me on LinkedIn. And you can also reach out to me in my email. My email is my full name, utkarshsangi@gmail.com.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll include some of those links so people can find you. Again, thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you very much. It was great.
All right. Absolutely. That's it for this episode. We'll be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, I thought this was a great topic. When we first spoke about it, I wanted to make sure that we did the topic justice. Hopefully you found value in it. And I think we really talked about some great components of what it means to be a senior engineer, move past it, talked about leadership, the role of the manager. Hopefully you will find someone else who will benefit from this episode. Please share it with them. I'd appreciate that. Also, like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how you think the podcast is going. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.